Let's start with some of those aftershocks. We're back to school now. We've sort of come through the pandemic, except not quite. How is it handled in New Jersey? How are you as you go back to school and you get your economy back going again?
Good to be with you, David. Hopefully, it is as normal a school year as we could hope for. We clearly have a lot of mental health and learning loss to make up for. We're throwing an enormous amount of resources at that. There are no masking requirements. Districts can require it if they so choose, but not at the state level. No vaccination or testing. So we are learning to live with this. It's still in our midst, but we're hoping for a great school year at long last.
One of the things, unfortunately, we have to think about as we go back to school right now is the possibility of violence and protecting our school children. I know you've been on the forefront of that. What actions is New Jersey taking? What actions are you taking?
Yeah, we had already done a lot over the prior 4 years, but recently we took two steps. One aimed at human capital, if you will, threat assessment teams, which each district is now required to have with educators, law enforcement, psychiatrists to try to figure out where there may be some frailty in the school population. And then secondly, a pretty aggressive step on mapping electronically all school buildings in the entire state. We'd already done about half of them. We're now mandating over the course of the next year that every one of them be able to be called up by law enforcement and other first responders on a smartphone so they know exactly where each classroom, each entrance and exit is, both inside and outside.
Governor, through the pandemic, a lot of us were struck by the coordination with New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. You had a group there that were really working together. At this point, though, there's a little bit, it seems like, of a falling out over the question of taxation. We have New York saying they want to tax people who are working in New Jersey, but for New York companies. You have a proposal, as I understand it, to do something similar in New Jersey. What is that about? And is that potentially a source of real money for New Jersey?
Yeah, we'll see, David. We still have great relations with our neighbors. In fact, later this afternoon, I'm going to be on the phone with Governor Wolf, and Governor Hochul and I are grabbing a cup of coffee together. I'd say the same about Governors Carney and Lamont. We just want to make sure we're standing up for our taxpayers and our commuters. So whether it's how they're taxed by our neighbors or this proposal for a congestion pricing scheme that would be a huge burden on New Jersey commuters, we can have it both ways. We can have good relations, but I'm going to stand up and I will not relent on behalf of our taxpayers and commuters.
So, Governor, I know you're no fan of that congestion pricing, as it's called, where they charge people for coming into Midtown Manhattan. At the same time, could it benefit New Jersey? I wonder, during the pandemic, you and I would talk about the possibility of changing people's habits, about where they lived, where they worked from. Is that happening, or are people going back to the norm?
It is happening. I think you've got more of a norm since the last time you and I spoke, but I think there are going to be three types of places folks show up for work, either at headquarters, their home, or I think increasingly as sort of middle ground, plug and play operations. We know at least one Wall Street firm that is proceeding with something like that in New Jersey. So there's sort of a halfway point. But the congestion pricing, David, it's not that I'm against mitigants against pollution. We're all for that. But it can't be taken out on the backs of New Jersey commuters. And by the way, because of a lot of inaction in the past, we don't have the sufficient rail tunnel under the Hudson or the bus terminal in New York. There may be a good time and place for that, but it isn't now.
You took me right there, the Gateway Tunnel. I can't talk to you without talking about that because a lot of people in New York and New Jersey are really focused on that. I just saw that, in fact, it's going to cost more and it's going to get started later. What's going on with the Gateway Tunnel? Are you going to have the money to get it started?
We will, and that's a good news story. The relationship among the feds, New York, New Jersey, the Port Authority, Amtrak, could not be stronger. That is making enormous progress. I'm not happy that the price is going up. But with the supply chain challenges, frankly, I'm not surprised. The feds have been great. New York has been great. I feel really good at long last, by the way. This thing has been delayed for decades. These tunnels that are there now, as you know, were built in 1910. So we need two new ones and we need to rehab the old ones. I think at long last, we're getting there.
Another thing that people are interested in around these parts is something called the American Dream, that mega mall over in New Jersey that has had a pretty checkered history, if I can put it that way. It's been started and restarted. And right now, there are questions about whether, in fact, it can make its payments. I think it didn't make an interest payment that it owed you just recently. You worked for Goldman Sachs. You're a successful businessman. Is this a deal that's going to make in the end, or is this a troubled deal that's going to have to turn into a workout?
No, I think, David, I'm confident to say that I think this thing is finally turning the corner. It did have a checkered history. Then you had a pandemic. Then you had really the e-retailing phenomenon. And then you had a pandemic. I think at long last, they are turning the corner. When you get there, you can see how this thing is going to look when it's successful. But it's been a long road. But again, I think they're getting there.
Are you willing to put more money into the deal?
I hope we don't have to put more money in. Please, God. I hope it can get there on its own 2 feet.
Finally, let's talk a little bit about politics, if we could, Governor. You have said that if Joe Biden decides to run for president again, that you will wholeheartedly support him. I believe that is what you've said. What if he decides not to run? Who do you think would be a good candidate? And is there anybody named Murphy that might want to run?
Yeah, listen, I've said this publicly, David, and the president and I spoke privately last week in the White House. I said, listen, I take you on your word. You say you're running. I'm assuming you're running. And assuming you do run, you'll have no stronger supporter than yours truly. And I mean that with all my heart. And I think the hypothetical stuff, when a guy is saying it unequivocally that he's going to run, I think we'll leave the hypothetical stuff for another day. He's also, by the way, had one heck of a run here over the past several months, mostly for good reasons. Unfortunately, some for bad reasons, like the right-wing U.S. Supreme Court and abortion and whatnot. But this is a guy who's on a roll right now, and I think we owe it to him to get completely behind him.
So is it enough of a role to carry the Democrats through in the midterms? I mean, there's obviously questions about the Senate seems to be hanging in the balance. The House, people had thought would almost definitely go to Republicans. What's your take?
Listen, I think it's a lot better than it was 3 months ago, but we need to continue to get better over the next 60 days. We've got a third of the Senate, the whole House, 36 governors' races. I'm the vice chair of the Democratic Governors Association, so there's a lot of tight races. So the trend is good, but we cannot take anything for granted. I'd rather be playing our hand than their hand, but we got to sprint through the next 60 days.